Good morning and welcome to the Big Buzz Breakfast Club. We are super excited to be presenting how to run your organization like a boss this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping items. The session is being recorded and will be shared with you via email after the event. Please be sure to post any questions in the Q&A box or the chat, and questions will be answered at the end. We have left a little bit of time to be able to address those when we finish the main presentation. And also, if we have the closed captioning on, if you would like to turn it off, simply click the button at the bottom of your screen to disable it. So for those of you who are not familiar with Big Buzz Idea Group, many nonprofits executives lack the staff, time, skills, and funding that they need. Big Buzz Idea Group fills gaps in management, marketing, and event services so you can focus on the big picture and position your organization to thrive. Just a little bit about me to kick it off and help you understand my position. But I was a former executive director before I started Big Buzz Idea Group. And I remember all too clearly that I was relatively young and very inexperienced and super excited about this job that I was, going to receive as the executive director. And I showed up following the interview process on day one at the office, and the president handed me the keys, said, "This is your office and go." And I was like, all right, well, I don't know anything about being an executive director, so this should be interesting. And then, I started to spin the plates. You all are spinning the plates, right? And so, I started just digging in a little bit on the event side, a little bit on the membership side, a little bit on the community service side, and really just kind of kept putting one foot in front of the other. But eventually, in 3 years, with 24 events, 12 newsletters, 8 committees, and a staff of only myself, it started to feel a whole lot more like this on the plates I was spinning. And I think it's amazing that all of us are working so hard to make an impact. And I'm not sure what size staff you might be working with, but even small staffs sometimes start to get stretched a little bit too thin. And so inevitably, then sometimes we feel like this, right? We are terrified of this. I know. I was absolutely just so fearful all the time that I was going to forget something that was so important, something that needed to be done. And so it's only all of these years later, now that I'm a business owner supporting nonprofits and associations, that I feel like I've really started to understand a whole lot better what I wish I had known back when I was an executive director. So I'm really excited for this session because I just think there's a lot of pieces that we need to think about and look at. When we look at those small teams that are running nonprofits or associations, or the individuals, for those of you who are a staff of one, you have to do all of these things. You are doing, the phone calls, the general outreach, the all of the communications, from the event planning to the emails to donation requests for many of you. You're trying to support your board. You're doing speaking and community presentations. You've got to raise the money. You've got to do the events, guide the committees, support the committees, all while building relationships and strategic alliances to help your organization grow. And so, back then, I was so busy doing that I did not really step back and think about this big picture and all of these individual things. And it's actually, it's this concept that Big Buzz was actually born out of, in the concept that I struggled to do all of the things on this page. And some of you have even more than this, right? This doesn't even tackle programs and things of that nature on here, which is the core of what most of us are doing. But the concept around being so busy doing that we couldn't tackle it. And so I started Big Buzz because I realized that it's hard, if you are an individual staff member, to have all of these skill sets and balance them appropriately is super hard. And so Big Buzz started to be able to kind of be an outsourced partner where we could kind of pick and choose. You could get a little bit of this and a little bit of that, so that maybe you get bookkeeping and communications assistance. Maybe you get help on your newsletter, because we knew that organizations were struggling with this. So I'm not sure which of these things might actually stretch you a little thinner than you need to be. But when you are stretched this thin and you're in the doing and the day-to-day piece of all of this, then it's really hard to think about the organization holistically. It's very hard to think about the future and where you're going with any kind of intention. And so to run your organization like a boss, it really has to start with a vision. You want to think about, where is your organization going? It's really important that we carve out time in our crazy busy schedules. And if you're at all like me, it feels like it's just lightning speed since we've come out of the pandemic. But you really do need to think about, where is your organization going and how are you going to get there? If we just keep doing the day-to-day stuff and spinning all of those plates, then it's easy to kind of get stuck. You may have small growth. You may keep putting a little bit of effort in and seeing incremental changes. But to really have strong impact and to really be intentional about the growth that your organization is going to have, you've got to make time for the visioning and the strategy. If you don't currently have a strategic plan for your organization, I strongly encourage you to advocate for it. It's really important to set your priorities. And so when you map out the path, I've shared this example here that, we love this program called the One Page Business Plan. It's very easy for you to do without any, access or purchasing of a new program, but there is a whole outline and a website and a company dedicated to the One Page Business Plan. But we use this concept with a lot of our organizations, where in our retreats, in our annual planning with our board or our executive committee, whatever that looks like for you, we start with that whole vision. Where do you want to go and what do you want to be? And so with that, then we come up with the objectives, then we build the strategies, and then we look at what actions we have to take to support that. And so what I love about this concept is that you can do this from the highest level with your executive committee and your board. And then once those priorities are set for the year, then you can take this to your committees and charge them with ensuring that everything they do helps grow the core, goals and outlines that the executive committee and the board have set. And so I love this one. It talks here for NAWBO Chicago, who's one of our clients, that within the next 3 years, they want to grow to 400 members and an annual revenue of $275,000 while expanding access to leadership opportunities across the full spectrum of our membership, effectively representing the full diversity of the Chicagoland, Naperville, Joliet, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin women business owner community. So the really interesting thing is that they set this a few years ago. And when we came on board, membership was dwindling. They had dropped quite significantly. And with the intentionality and this focus, they've actually started to accelerate. They have now been the largest chapter in the country 2 years in a row. They are now growing their membership successfully, and they're very clear on creating this community for women business owners where they can meet with people who are, like-minded and understand one another. And then we build out the objectives, strategies, and actions from that. How are we going to make that goal happen? How are we going to achieve this vision that we have for the organization? And so I wanted to share this concept today in the hopes that it will help you in your planning too. I think once you have your plan, we have to start to think about, what are the necessary resources that we're going to need to achieve that plan. And, obviously money. We know money seems to be at the core of so many things, but without it, it's hard to, advance the organization. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. Leadership, right? You've got to be building a pipeline. You've got to be thinking about not just this year's board, but next year's board and the following year's board, and who's going to be in the leadership chair. Your staff, for those of you who do have a staff, you really need to think about the skill sets and the pieces that you need most to get where you want to go. And we'll talk more in detail about staff. And time, another just really high valued item that we never have enough of in this industry. And I think most people don't have enough time, but I know when I was an executive director, there was always so much more that I wanted to do. And I kept thinking if I just did this one thing, it would advance me a little bit more towards where I want to go. But it got to the point, right, where it started to feel like a hamster wheel, and it felt like no matter how fast I was running, I wasn't getting anywhere. So we will talk about some time management, ideas and thoughts today to help you be able to make time for what I consider the important work to grow your organization and run it like a boss versus those urgent, unexpected items that just push a lot of demands on us on a regular basis. Of course, there's the committees and the volunteers that you may work with. And then obviously there are the tools, your bylaws, your policies, procedure manuals. And then there are these byproducts of the culture of your organization. When I was young and inexperienced, I was not aware that I really had a voice and I had choices and that I could help drive and guide the culture of our organization. And I think that if I had had more of those conversations in a more direct way and had a stronger partnership with my board, then I definitely think that things could have been different for that organization I was part of. And I think that, when you talk about things like culture, it can be co-created. It starts with group discussions and really trying to get people on board. But I think it's really important to be intentional. I know, here at Big Buzz, for example, we have 5 pillars that define everything we do and everything we are. And I encourage your organization and your nonprofit to have that as well, just as your true north and your guiding principles. So first, let's talk about financial management. We all wish money grew on trees, right? So, I think that it's amazing budgeting. We here at Big Buzz inherited a client that had been with a large management company, and we were stunned to find out there was no budget in place. So while I feel like budgeting is a given, and you must all have one, I have to also stress the importance of having one if there's anybody with us today who might not already have one in place. Your money is so critical. You need to know where it's going. You need to identify if there are places you can tighten up. You have to identify additional revenue opportunities. And so budgeting is incredibly important. One of the really important things that I did not know when I was younger is the fact that you also can't just wash, rinse, and repeat your budget. If you have that vision, you need to really think in identifying the resources you will need to achieve that vision. What has to change in your budget? Where do you need additional revenue, and or where might there be additional expenses to get where you want to go? If you keep wash, rinse, and repeating your budget and just, moving it along from year to year, you're not going to actually be able to do more than you're currently doing. Because if you want to hire more staff, right, you can't do it on the same amount of money. You need to budget for more money to hire more people. So it's really important that you make sure that the budget is lining up with your vision and that there are those places in there where you can adjust your numbers to really be able to find the funding and to be able to cover the expenses with any ideas you have for growth, and also identify how that growth could generate additional revenue. I think that it will help you tell a clearer story to any of your donors too, for those of you who do donor solicitations, and it continues to help you just stretch a lot further. I encourage you all to diversify your revenue streams whenever possible. I think that on a lot of our events, we like to have multiple revenue streams. Within our client organizations, we like to have multiple revenue streams. So whatever that might look like, from fundraising to membership to events to sponsors to grants, you just really need to think about all the things you could tap into. I know that we have one client who has just really started to concentrate a lot more on the grant making space, and they're just really primed to do really well in getting those grants, from the standpoint that they're talking about $500,000 for their organization or more. So really knowing what you have to offer to the grant world, and for those of you who are doing things in, that are changing, some of the different pockets of a community, or for those of you who might be training and doing workforce development. And sometimes, right, you can get, there are grants for minority initiatives, but then there's grants for workplace development, and maybe you can get both. So you really always want to be thinking about what revenue streams exist for you. I think a fundraising plan is another plan that really helps set you up for success. You need to think about, what does the pie of funding look like for you and your organization? Are there opportunities you haven't touched yet? Are there roads and opportunities that you'd like to explore? And just think about what that could look like. I think looking at also, right, fundraising, how our boards can help us, how our committees can help us, how our sponsors can help us. We just have to think about how to get other people involved as well. And then your events. We often do an event called Tweak It or Tank It. And that is from the standpoint that we love to not just wash and rinse and repeat events. When I was an executive director, there were events they had just been doing for like 30 years. They had run their course, and we were not getting the buy-in or the attendance or the participation we wanted. I had to analyze the membership base, and it was changing. And so our events needed to change with it, and we needed to keep with the times if we really wanted to be considered a credible organization and have any buy-in with our community. And so really looking at your events, are they netting a return? It takes a lot of resources to produce an event. And if they're not producing the desired outcomes on the back end, that's a problem. Look at your membership dues. I think it's really important that I know a lot of organizations with membership have not wanted to raise dues. And I think that we're all getting to a place where, coming out of, where we're at with the economy now, coming out of the pandemic, we don't have a choice, right? The supply chain has raised so many fees for us, all the way from salaries to taxes to, the payroll taxes, which everybody pays. And things of that nature, that we can no longer, even, event venues and food and beverage, it's not what it used to be. And it's, sometimes 2 and 3 times as much. And so we really have to be able to move those fees on to our members. We have to make sure that the membership fee is covering any cost of the benefits they receive. And we need to look at inching that needle up. And I think, sometimes it's how you present that, how you tell the story, and being able to have good data to support your initiative always helps when you have to raise fees. But it may happen with your events too. And I encourage people to tell the story, right? Don't let your audience just think, oh, we just decided to double it this year for the fun of it. I think to really, try to explain to people that to combat the rising cost of these items, you will see that, tickets or dues are more expensive than in previous years. And kind of be able to tell a story around that to help people understand it. It could be a simple infographic to just show how much costs have gone up to run the same organization you're running from one year to the next. But, and if you have identified one of those opportunities that you really want to go for, that might also be something you really want to tout out and tell people, we're raising money for this, and this is how short we are. So sometimes I feel like with money, we can be a little bit closed off, but sometimes we need to educate people and let them know what we're struggling with so that they too can understand why it's happening. Lots of times, if people understand the why to something, they're a lot more receptive to kind of processing and receiving it. Again, your grants, we are working with one client right now who's incredibly heavy on the federal grant front and really trying to help them continue to balance out other year-round grants that they have more access to becomes really important for them. So having a balanced grant portfolio, all of these items, I also recommend that nobody has all of their eggs in one basket. And again, by diversifying these revenue streams, if something dries up here, you still have these other 2 or 3, revenue sources to continue to help your organization thrive. And a lot of organizations that didn't make it through the pandemic are the ones that only had a single revenue stream. And when that was, tapped into or eliminated, they could not continue. So really, this is so incredibly important. Sponsorship is another great opportunity that a lot of people haven't taken advantage of. And I think that there are different routes to go with sponsorship. You can tap into local community, you can tap into people who support your cause, and or you can go after, large companies and get bigger dollars if they are connected to your cause. So when you spend some time strategically thinking about who supports your industry, who does work in your space, what companies are committed to a similar cause as you, those are great ideas for how you can forge relationships and try to get additional sponsorship on board for your project and your organization. And then managing cash flow. I wish I could see everybody, and I wish we could do a raise of hands. I had no idea what cash flow was when I was put in as an executive director. Looking back now, I can't believe they made me an executive director because you have to manage the cash flow and the dollars. And to put a young person in a role where they have no clue about that is not, not ideal. So really think about on your budgeting, don't just do your budget, but then break it out over the course of the 12-month period. What does it look like the income and the revenue will be for each month? What do the expenses look like each month to make sure that they're balancing out appropriately? This will help you identify if you may have a month or two in your year where things dry up a little bit. We see that a lot with our clients. They have high season and they have low season. And so sometimes the money starts to run out midstream and they have to do some things to plan for those lighter months. So when you start to know that they're coming, right, it gives you better ways to tighten up your dollars and to stretch them thinner. The other thing is sometimes in lush months, people, including boards, I see it all the time. We do a lot of conservative budgeting on our events because committees and boards get excited about what they think they can raise, and then they want to start spending money that they haven't actually received yet. And if it doesn't go as well as they had hoped, if they don't sell as many tickets, if they can't get the returning sponsors, if those things aren't in place, they may not have that great, amazing success. So trying to also not overspend in times of, of lushness, but to really think about stretching that out and being able to plan for those leaner months is a huge part of success if you really want to run your organization well. When it comes to leadership, I know that none of you are an island, right? You've got your board and there's so much that happens in that space. We have a whole separate webinar on board, board development, board growth, board management. But what I did want to touch on today, just briefly, is to really make sure everybody knows you should have your roles defined if you don't already. Defining roles can not only help people understand what they're getting into, but sometimes it can help people understand that maybe being on a board's not so daunting. I've had a lot of people who've never served and they were a little intimidated by coming on and worried they wouldn't do a good job. And so when you have that outline of this is basically what you're asked to do, and they're like, oh, that's it? Oh, I can do that. So I think having those conversations and really having those defined roles becomes important. It's incredibly important to build your pipeline. We've seen too many clients who are desperate for a board chair, and they will just bring somebody who's maybe new to an organization and put them in a seat at the top of, the top of the org chart. And there's just a lot of reasons that they haven't maybe got to understand the whole culture yet. Maybe they haven't had time to absorb and really kind of understand where the organization's at. Maybe they haven't already collaborated or worked with people in the organization to kind of understand the big picture. And so there can be a lot of problems with that. Sometimes it can go really well, but you want to constantly be analyzing who's strong on your committees. Would they be good to invite into the boardroom? You know, what other assets and skills do you need on your board to be successful? And should you, are there people in your community that you could ask who have those skills and talents and ask them to join your board? And so really building that pipeline of people that have good value and understand your organization and really kind of are devoted and passionate about your cause, those make the best board members because they help think about things creatively and they really help you grow. And definitely vet your candidates. Again, I know a lot of organizations that are, they struggle to fill their board roster. So they'll put anybody who applies on the board. And that can make, I'm a fan of Brene Brown's, bring the rumble, bring the tough conversations, talk about all the angles, tear it apart. But remember to hold on to your vision and your mission and what your overall purpose is, and let that dictate the outcomes of the rumbles. When board members and staff understand that, then you absolutely are going to make stronger, better decisions. And it's okay to have those tough conversations. But sometimes if you don't vet your candidates, you may just get a wild card who can really derail your board and prevent the good work that needs to happen. So I encourage, board interviews. I encourage being able to look at how well you know these people, have meetings with them before they come on the board, get to know them, have other people on the board get to know them, really have a process that would work for you so that you can vet those candidates. And then, much like I said, bring them up the ladder. Have them start by joining a committee, maybe be a committee chair, then maybe grow onto the board, then maybe be in the executive committee, so that there's kind of a succession plan and that you are really building that up. And I also think as part of that vetting and nominating and bringing people in, it's important to also be clear about the expectations of your board members. If your organization meets, the third Wednesday of every month, but a board member has a conflict already on those days and times, they're never going to be in the boardroom. So that's not setting yourself up for success. So the more you can outline the expectations and the opportunities for the give get, we have an organization that, they're struggling with being able to make the give get. And so what we are really focused on are creating alternative ways right now that they can still meet that and feel good about themselves. So they don't feel like they shirked a responsibility, but they are contributing to the organization in a way that's a lot easier, and we're helping them make a plan. And then succession planning as well is really important. I think that, that president-elect should always be coming in and training with your current president. And then as your president rolls off to the immediate past president, hopefully that person stays and helps support the other two that are coming through the chain. And that way you've got continuity with three people always being at kind of in those key leadership roles. They can lean on each other, they can collaborate, they can help train the next round of leaders, and they can do things, give you advice and serve as great guidance when they've already been through the process. So I found that to be just a great model if you're not already using that. And then staffing. I think this is another place where when I was in your shoes, I didn't know what I needed. I was so busy doing all the time that I hadn't stepped back and really thought with any intentionality, like, how am I spending my time? And where would it help me to have a person who could take some of this responsibility and free me up to do more important work in recruiting members, securing dollars, etc. So I think you've got to start by really thinking about the skills and the talents, like, what are your strong suits? What are your natural gifts and talents? And where are you weaker? It's okay to say that you've got some weak spots because we all do. But when you identify your weaknesses or the things you struggle with maybe you're doing them right, but maybe they're a little bit harder and thus they require a lot more of your time than you wish they did. And so maybe a specialist in that area would actually free you up to do many more amazing things that you actually excel at. So, we like to call it your zone of genius. You always want to be working in your zone of genius, and then you want to hire staff or outsource partners to be able to fill those other gaps and be able to just allow your organization to rise faster to more successes. In hiring, it's really important that you learn hiring best practices. This is also a future webinar that we need to offer, because there's a lot that goes into thinking about interviewing, and a lot of people aren't trained on that. I know I never was. And so how am I supposed to interview my board members? How am I supposed to interview any potential staff or even your volunteers for that matter? You want to get to know them and understand, again, what are their strengths and talents so you can leverage them to the greatest good. And then once you identify those roles that you need to, again, start thinking about who do you know that could support you and fill in. And sometimes you can get creative in how you meet those roles. A lot of people, working moms, lots of times they want a little something on the side. So you might be able to get somebody part-time. It doesn't always have to be full-time. You can outsource, you can find a key volunteer. There's just a lot of options, and in really kind of analyzing what your organization can afford, what you can, endure is really important in this process and how you plan to go forward. What are the responsibilities that go with this? Again, I think that, what do you want them to own? And being really clear, this may seem like a little bit of overkill, but I think the role you share during the interview process and the starting out process, the responsibilities you want to drill down on and talk about how they do it. Talk about what they're doing. You really want to be able to see through all of that, so that they can be clear on how they can succeed. You're actually setting them up for much greater success if they know what they're responsible for, and then be sure to hold them accountable. I think sometimes we don't like confrontation. We may shy away from, bringing up things that make us uncomfortable or things that we are not feeling good about. But you want to be direct and you want to be firm and you want to nip problems in the bud. So it's really important that you do hold people accountable. And I don't, in the old days, I'm dating myself, but the annual review. I mean, a boss would save up all the problems and then go over them one time a year. What good does that do anybody? I can't hardly remember last week, let alone 10 months ago. So I think really trying to address accountability in the moment becomes really important when the example's there, when it's top of mind, and when you can fix the problem, right? If you don't fix it immediately, you're letting that same undesired behavior continue indefinitely. So just get that right out of the way. And then communication. I heard a horror story about a young-ish employee, first real job out of college and headed into the pandemic. I think they went 3 months without hearing from their boss in the remote work environment. That's horrible. So really thinking about how you're communicating with your team, setting up for success. I know we at Big Buzz like to have 2 meetings a week. We do a Monday kickoff that has its own agenda that we follow, and we have our Friday call that has a different agenda and tackles different things. But those are ways to bring our team together, especially in a hybrid environment, to be able to help people get to know each other better. And it keeps everyone connected about all of the work we're doing, rather than making people feel like they're in silos and don't have any idea what else is going on in the business. So your organization is no different. And I think that communicating clearly with the team, annual expectations, monthly expectations, weekly expectations, starts to really be important. And don't feel like you have to have it all created before you can share it with anybody. Feel free to go ahead and start it. I think too many times we get overwhelmed because we can't do the whole thing at once, but it's okay to get it started and then keep adding to it. And then it's far more manageable because it's bite-sized chunks. And then again, I'm really talking about culture here. I think that the culture and the environment that you work within is so important. My first job out of college was incredibly toxic. There was so much gossip and rumoring and not anybody working together and not collaborative. And I vowed that I would never work for an organization like that again. And so in my nonprofits, right, like it's so important to have a team atmosphere. It's just so important to have a collaborative spirit. And so really thinking about what you want that culture to be, how you want to treat others, how you want others to treat you, how do you want the conversations to happen? Are there, places and times? And I think, again, leadership sometimes has to have difficult discussions, but making sure everybody knows they should be in closed door sessions and they should be left in that room once everybody exits. It all just starts to become part of your culture. And again, if you can't make an ideal culture overnight, just start with some small things, some principles, some values that guide your decisions and the way you treat one another. And I think it will make a huge difference for you. Time management. This is the one that I was clueless about as a young person. And in my role as an executive director, I got burned out. I ended up starting out, like I said, thought I was spinning all the plates successfully and it wasn't that bad. But inevitably, it all started to pile up and it got harder and harder and harder. And so I think it's really important for us to hit pause for a moment and to really think about all of the demands on your time and which ones are the most important. You want to always be asking as a leader in your organization, is this the highest and best use of my time? And if it's not, the top 3 bullets here are things that I think are so important. If there is anything you can eliminate from your daily, weekly, monthly routine, really think about it and look at that. I think that, eliminating small tasks that get in the way, if you can offload those to somebody else, which we cover in the delegation, then that's even better. But definitely think about it. Helps us when we pause a minute to think about how we're spending our time. It helps us think about the things that we could avoid. Sometimes I have a lot of people who like to recommend that clients do like a 3-day session where you track all of your time for those 3 days. But what I recommend, even if you can't do that, if you're too busy, is to just have like a clipboard or a notepad by the side of your computer. And each time that something pops up that you're like, oh, I wish somebody else could do this. Or, oh, I wish somebody else was taking care of this. And this is just not the best use of my time. Start making a list because that helps you identify then how to tap people in the future. If there's anything you can automate with technology, do it. I think that there's a lot of things I did the hard way in the beginning. And I will talk about time tracking is something that we used to have a part-time employee here who did that for us. And then we went to a platform called Harvest app where all of the time tracking is now done easily. Reports are at our fingertips at any minute of a day, and it just is far more useful. And, we now are paying a nominal fee. It's a fraction of what we paid for that part-time person who was doing only data entry before. So really think about, again, stepping back and thinking about what you could automate could really save you time. And if you don't know, if you're not a technology, guru, then definitely tap somebody who is and start to talk about some simple, cost-effective ideas that could help. And then I recommend time blocking. I talked earlier, and I've got it noted here again about the urgent work versus the important. We have a knack, right? Maybe a volunteer is going to do that newsletter and we're counting on them and we've got our day planned, but then they get sick. And that newsletter's got to go out. So now your whole plan gets scrapped and you now are trying to cover that employee and that need to get that newsletter out. I think it starts to be something to really start to think about. How do you make time to do the important work? Because the urgent can always take over. There's always another deadline. There's always an unexpected demand. There's always a member who needs help. The board might need, something might pop up and there's a lot of extra discussions. But the important work and the focused work is what's going to help you advance your mission the way you want to. So, look at when you, I think we all have a natural cadence in the day for when we're at our best, our peak performance. And so try to time block around that time frame so that you can get 1 or 2 hours a day in on the important work and then address the urgent work. I like to do my important work in the morning because then I do it before my day runs away like a freight train that the brakes aren't working. So think about how you time block, or if there's one project or one task that's really important for you to keep developing. Maybe you're launching a new program. Maybe you are starting to build out a training manual or a processes manual. Like, if those are some of your organizational goals and the most important thing, maybe it's just 1 2-hour block a week that's devoted to that. So just look at your timeline and definitely put some things on your calendar that will help you get your necessary work done. Because with all the meetings these days, it can be really challenging to do the work too. I talked about the weekly planning. There is a business coach that I just love who talks about, the Sunday night planning tool. Usually they identify 3 big goals that they're working on to help them achieve their mission or vision. And they have just a quadrant on a piece of paper. And it's like, what they look at their week and what task is touching which of those big items. So maybe, you've got membership, maybe you've got fundraising and strategy. Those are your 3 buckets, right? They look at their week, and anything that wouldn't tap those 3 categories, they consider the devil's vortex, and it goes into that 4th quadrant. And those are things they try to get off their calendars so that they're not wasting their time in the week ahead. And so it's really a great way to help you stay on point. And then we already talked about analyzing your schedule too. The other thing I would add, I know we used to do a lot of 60-minute meetings, and we really are assessing a lot more. Could this be done in a 15-minute meeting? Could this be done in a 30-minute meeting? And it's amazing when you only have 30 minutes, how you can consolidate things and keep on task. So I think that is another really wonderful idea to help you find more time in your week in an effort to keep you focused on that bigger vision. I like to think a little bit about kind of some random thoughts that, in running your organization effectively, I think start to come into fruition. And I really wish, this first one, what is your story? What are you telling people? What are you saying? Because I didn't realize that, I had, even if externally I might not have had my voice or felt like I had a really strong say in the conversation sometimes with my board or with the organizational leadership, but internally even I could tell myself what I wanted. So sometimes we have to start with internally, what do we think? How do we stay positive, right? I love we talked a lot recently about focus, and what you focus on grows. So if the story you're saying is that, if you keep telling everybody like we're struggling, we don't have enough money, we can't get enough people, what do you think you're going to get? You're not going to turn that around. So it's really important that, you think about the positive organically, what's going right? And how do you share that out to get people enthused, get people excited? Because, we tend to focus on like the lower 20% of items that might not be going well. And we forget to focus on the 80% that might be going really well. And what you focus on and what you measure grows. So it's really important to stay positive and do what you need to do for self-care and staying on track with those thoughts. And then how you communicate that out to others becomes really important, because that's how you recruit others to feel your energy, feel your passion, and get on board with you for change. I think that it's incredibly important to over communicate. This is something I learned, that I always thought I was being so clear. I thought that, I was telling people details. I thought I was giving them all of the information they would need to help. And in reality, I wasn't. I lived it and breathed it. And so I had it all running in my head 24/7, but I wasn't always communicating it out well. And so I really think, especially in these incredibly crazy busy days that people are having, everybody is, that over communication is better. Sometimes you do have to tell people the same thing 2, 3, 4 times to confirm that they got it. Sometimes you got to put it in writing. Sometimes it might be in a conversation, but don't be afraid to keep sharing information because it will do you a service in the long run. I also think it's important to set boundaries. If what I find is a lot of people feel like you're at the demands of serving people, and most nonprofit professionals, right? You get into this sector because you want to help people, you want to make a difference. And so I always felt like I had to be available. I had to say yes to everything. But it turns out, right? Like I can still set boundaries. Sometimes the only person putting those expectations on me is me. So I may automatically think if somebody says, "Hey, can we meet?" Oh, they want to meet this week. Well, they didn't say this week. I added that in. So maybe they can wait and meet next week, or maybe in 2 weeks after my big event's over. So I encourage you to think about how you can set some boundaries for yourself. Maybe it is around your time block, right? If Wednesdays from 8 to 10, you're going to work on your strategic plan and you don't want to be uninterrupted, again, put it on your calendar, hold the space for it, and set the boundaries that nothing else can override that item on your calendar. So I think setting those boundaries continues to help you very much. And I think that the other thing we have to remember, I did not do this well at all, but we can say no to things. And every time you say yes to something that somebody asks you to do, you're saying no to something else because now it's going to take time from you. So every time somebody asks you something, I encourage you to get comfortable saying no sometimes, which can be really hard for people who want to be helpers and doers and givers. But again, when you're really clear on your vision and mission, it helps you identify like, how does this ask help my vision and mission? And is this something I should be doing? Sometimes nonprofit professionals will have something that seems really similar to what they do, and they think it's not a big tangent to help, but all of a sudden it might be a whole different spin on what your organization does, and it does take you away from your direct mission. So I just encourage you to really think about what you're saying yes to. You've got to remember that you can't please everyone. This was one of the reasons I quit my original executive director job because I felt like I had to please everybody all the time and I couldn't. And I didn't know how to live with that. And I am so grateful for the people I've met along the way who just know you can't please all the people all the time and you don't need to. Seth Godin did, for those of you who might know him, he does a blog daily. And one of his blogs was about the fact that if you reach the 1% that really resonates with you, that's all you actually need to be successful. Whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're a business, out of all the things in the world, you're only looking for a small sliver. And when you find the ones that are really on par with you, on point with you, amazing things can happen. So, I think that that's something we need to hang on a shelf and really just make that go away if that's something you struggle with. Take your time off. I know that I never did. I always thought if I could run a little harder, if I could run a little faster, if I could get a little more done, but you need to step away. That's how you prevent the burnout. Again, setting boundaries too. Sometimes I had to take nights off. I had to stop working the long hours, and that would help avoid the burnout. But when you take time off, you start to also get out of the weeds and all of the day-to-day, spinning of the plates. And you actually start to think bigger picture. You actually have a new perspective. I can't explain how or why it happens, but even walks in nature, walks around the building, all of those things actually start to expand your thinking in a really powerful way. So if you haven't tried that or haven't been able to get away, I encourage you to do that. I feel like a lot of nonprofit people I know forego their vacation time in an effort to continue contributing to the mission. But in the end, it really is in everybody's best interest for you to take care of yourself. And then on the really rough days when things seem really complicated, revisit your why. I love to always think about why do we do what we do? And sometimes it helps to remind us that that's just a bad day, it will pass, and that we really do love the cause we serve or the reason why we're there to be able to advance the mission and make the world a better place in some capacity. With that, I would love to open it up for questions. And if my team could help share any questions with me that come in, that would be fabulous. Please do drop those in the chat. I would also love to know of the items that were shared today, I would love to know what your biggest takeaway is. If you also would put that in the chat, I would love to see what that might look like. Are there any questions? Any takeaways that anybody will share? If at this time there are no questions, I hope that you've learned some things in today's webinar that will help you run your organization like a boss. Please, if we can discuss this further and you would like to reach out, don't hesitate. I love to connect with people in the industry. I love to be able to understand how I can better support you and make new connections. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for starting your day with us here at the Breakfast Club.